Basically ready to go.
Yeah, I'm just going to
Okay, our next speaker has many qualifications that make him a suitable person to talk about the future of education, but I think probably the best one is the fact that he writes science fiction.
There's an advert for the books in there.
So I'm going to hand over now to Richard Adams.
Hello, are there any teachers in the room? Okay. No, it's interesting because obviously Alistair was talking about, designing for error. And one of the key things I recall from when I did my teacher training, which I am a qualified school teacher, is the thing about never backing a kid into a corner is really, really important. And always giving kids a way out when they're finding things difficult and hard to deal with. And that is the same as the stuff Alistair was talking about with museums. If you force people down this learning route, you literally will get people just screaming and kids going off and just not wanting to learn. And it's part of the art of teaching, very much so, I think, to recognise that sometimes you can tear things up and start again. Or sometimes you should have just thought about that better at the beginning. But anyway, so I've taken the tomorrow's world thing very, very literally. And I am going to sort of look 50 to 100 years in the future. So everything I say will be wrong, quickly. But one of the reasons I was asked to talk was that I've done a lot of things in my career. I've worked for over 20 years with digital stuff in different ways, in all those sorts of roles. But in the last few years, I've been working very heavily architecting big data systems, among other things. So my scope has gradually got bigger and bigger to enterprise scale. And I found myself in a situation where I was in a health business, architecting smart predictive health stuff. So that's kind of taken me on a new path, and I think that's very interesting, and it pertains very closely to A, my teaching background, and B, the idea of games. Now, with all this, I have actually designed lots and lots of casual games over the years on things like interactive television platforms, a couple of mobile games and so on in the past. And I've spent the last year at Microsoft Studios. So I've got some understanding of where you're coming from games point of view. But along the way, I've also done lots of things in education, including co-opening a college. The what? The water? No. Including working on and opening a college with someone that was unique because it had no teachers and worked on behavioural principles. I currently work also occasionally at Lincoln University as a senior fellow, so I've got a portfolio of things going off, but all of it is sort of in the digital space. The books I've mentioned, please buy. I'm getting cracking. I'm currently working on a murder thing at the moment, but these are the sci-fi shorts in series, so please buy them, they're good. So, let's talk about the future while I get a wet bum. Sorry, for those listening on the video, I've knocked the water over behind me. When I was researching this talk, I was struck by how many images we see of classrooms of the future and learning experiences that look like this. And, you start to get excited when you see this. Everybody's got an iPad, everybody's got a thing. And then I came across this about 4 seconds later, which actually looks exactly the same, but it's from 100 years ago. I mean, these even look like iPads, the slates. And actually what struck me about this was that the nature of how we teach people and the rooms in which we teach people and the framework in which we teach people hasn't significantly changed if you look at the two things. We're still talking about a formal situation. We're still talking about someone directing things at the front. Now, I know there are changes, and teaching has changed significantly, and we've seen, particularly in the last 40 years, the shift towards user-centered teaching or school-centered teaching, pupil-centered teaching. But I think, despite the current sort of pushback that we're getting back towards standard testing and things in the UK, I think the onward trend is towards that user-centered learning approach. Of course, in the end, a lot of what we teach and how we teach it is based on the society we have built. And it's really interesting that actually when you take a longer term view, your education system really does begin to reflect the society you're in. And I think, it's interesting that we are currently emerging from Industrial Revolution number 1, and we are running headlong into Industrial Revolution number 2. Industrial Revolution 1, if you look at history, was really about horsepower. It was about extending the human being and becoming more powerful and being able to make things through actually increased energy in machines. You know, and that led up to things like mass production, it led up to so and so. And the education system that we got, that developed during that period, was this idea of instruction. We needed a workforce that was just about smart enough to operate machines or to do clerical work. And therefore, that type of thing was delivered in a very machine-like way, rote learning. I talk, you listen, you repeat back. 6 months later, we test you on what you've learned. And that's a very machine-like approach in a very mechanical sense. Of course, you know, the fact that we're moving now into an industrial revolution that is not based on the machine as such and not based on mechanical stuff is quite interesting. We're moving into industrial revolution number 2, which I think, you know, really is this. We're seeing a shift, really, from society based on extending horsepower to a society based on extending brain power. And this has got profound implications. We have emerging at the moment an economy that is based on these principles, I think, and I would contend, you know, principles of, you know, big analytics, being able to understand from data what is happening. Machine to machine, second economy. There are whole levels of the economy now where machines are just doing the transactions without us ever intervening. And this is increasing in amount. We're seeing, you know, new economics of money emerging, virtual currencies, you know, the transactional stuff across borders disappearing, and so on. And we've had all these things in place for hundreds of years. We're seeing a social economy emerge, a mobile economy. You know, we're seeing security becoming incredibly important in this. This is a big pillar of the new economy. And we are seeing a very, very big push towards behavioural science and understanding how people behave. Because right at the middle of it, here, we are collecting data on people on a scale undreamed of. And we are starting to be able to get the computational power to analyse that in combination with this to tell us how people will behave in the rest of it. And again, this has profound implications, I think, for sort of education and the way we teach. I think when people talked about data being the new oil, which was a favourite cliche several years ago, they were wrong. They just didn't go far enough. It's far more important than that. It will change everything we are doing. Because right in the middle of it, this, you know, is this big data and behavioural science. We've just talked about, you know, cognition, behaviour, and so on. But I actually think this is now going to have a profound paradigm shift on education, learning, and teaching. We are very, very close, and we are marching quickly into a society where we are creating, you know, massive cradle-to-grave analytical views of people. It's just starting now. You only need to project 20 years, 30 years. Most of your life will be available in data form somewhere. Government agencies are doing this. We know it's been in the press a lot recently. But they're also doing things in very benign ways. So the education departments are starting to collect data on students and how they attain. And the data being asked for from schools and colleges is much more thorough, deep, and intense. And from that, we can start to do much more analysis. Now, the thing about once you get into analysis, and this is the interesting thing for me as both an educationalist and a creative, is that when I find myself in a position architecting a big data system, the things that these things could do started to actually, you know, make my eyebrows move over the back of my head quite quickly. I was working in a health business, and basically it very quickly became clear you can build a machine that will do a very good approximation of the day you will die if you ask it. Right? Nobody would. No company would produce such a machine unless they were PR idiots. Nobody wants to know when they're going to die. But actually there are so many factors around people's lives now that are being measured, and increasingly so, that we can start to do these predictive analytics. And if you want, at the end I can talk, you know, I'll talk afterwards deeper, at a deeper level about predictive analytics. But the thing for me, from a point of view of education, is once we have predictive analytics and we have a great understanding of behavioural science and computational power enough to process it, and a long enough set of years with enough data, there is no reason why we couldn't look at someone and the circumstances in which they are born and raised and allocate an individual learning path to them. There is no reason on earth why the holy grail of true pupil-centred learning cannot come true. Technically, we are on the way. And that has profound implications for teachers because it stops you writing curriculum. You know, it stops you thinking about how you teach things. And this is why it's very important for people in games and education. Because actually, one of the ways when you get into systems like this that you encourage people to learn is through things like gameplay techniques. Because we all know that we have an educational set of educational technologies out there now that can aid teachers in ways that were undreamt of 20 years ago. And these technologies are getting easier to use, they're getting faster, smarter, and more able. And it's already becoming the case that a lot of old-fashioned teacher tasks are becoming automated. So we are moving slowly, quietly, without people noticing, to a world where we are encapsulating large pots of data on people. We are starting to do analytics on that at government level, at an individual institution level. And once the data is big enough, we can start to predict. And we can predict accurately. A lot of trials, though, of putting technology in classrooms have been like this, which I always find quite amusing. Just replace the teacher with a box with a horrible video on. This is a genuine trial, and it's highly engaging teaching method, look. You know, it works just as well as most teachers. Sorry, teachers. I've been there. I feel your pain. But you know, this, in effect, is a method of introducing technology to learning that is the equivalent of what we have been doing with the web, where we have taken magazines and put them online, but we haven't substantially changed the format of what's being done. It's only in the last few years with things like social networks, learning systems, smart systems, and open platforms that we've started to generate things that are actually unique to the medium in terms of online content, you know, sites, etc. And similarly in teaching, it's only when we get to grips with what's underlying the new economy and the shifts that we will see true new radical things emerge, not just plastic pastiches of existing practices, which is what that really is. I'm sorry Korea, but there you go. And we know that predictive stuff is working. Those of you in the room who are techie or anybody who's watched the news know that we are now in the position of genuinely predicting crime. There are police forces in the US who are testing predictive crime. And what they are doing is basically every day the machine tells them that these are the areas of the city you need to concentrate your beat constables on. And they go there, and then the crime rate drops because actually they're a very visible presence. And this is entirely based on looking at existing massive pots of data. The prediction rate is very successful. When you get into things like big data and semantic IT, you can start getting to 95, 96% accuracy with prediction. It's an astonishing level of intelligence. You know, and some of the, you know, a lot of it's based on probability, but to make probability work, you need a big enough set of numbers. It's like weather forecasting. The more numbers we have about the weather and the bigger the computing power we have, the more accurate the weather forecasts get. The more we understand the science of people and how they behave, the more we understand how that person behaves, but not only them, their family, their friends, how they all link together, the closer we can get to being able to predict with a reasonable certainty how they'll behave in given set of circumstances. You know, and some of the systems I've worked on, the health system, you know, was basically a Bayesian probability machine. If anybody does maths, Bayesian probability is sort of in there. What was interesting about it, and I think that really made my eyebrows go over the back of my head, was that some of the code that generated the app was actually generated by another computer program. So not even the coding was being done by people. And this is a key feature of the new economy. We're seeing old jobs disappear rapidly without realising it. And in the next 20 years, we will see that accelerate. I'm not being pessimistic. I think new jobs emerge all the time. But, you know, we are seeing the real underlying shift occurring at the moment. We are moving to an era where we can quantify everything. And we can do smart, accurate analysis off the back of that. What's interesting, when this has been done in things like financial businesses, which it has, there are smart algorithms now that are out there trading. They are trading faster than people can trade, and they are doing things that people cannot predict. What's been really, really interesting when you start to look, and you can get this from just reading bits of the Financial Times, there are things happening on the trading markets that actually the people managing them have no idea what is going off. They don't know why the algorithms, for want of a better word, are behaving like they are. But it's all to do with their conditions, the data they've got, the task they're being asked to do, and they are producing new things consistently. Unexpected things, unexpected results. And of course, that's a key thing. Once you get big data, proper big data, and once you start analysing it, you know, you're in a system where, you know, as any chaos person will tell you, unexpected things can emerge. Because we cannot think of every possible condition and mitigate for that. And it's interesting that they're really struggling with this now to try and make these trading things work in a predictable way, but just ultra fast. And I'm not sure they can do it. I think the genie's out of the bottle on that one. And of course, education's not immune from all this. You know, there's a whole raft of technology just emerged in the last 10 years. But the most exciting stuff in terms of what you do is you're building apps, you're connecting to the cloud, and people in schools are now accessing information from all over the place. There is no reason why a kid has to be at school for half of what they do. There is no reason why a teacher has to be at school. You know, when we talk about things like virtual reality, we immediately think of the rubbish, blocky stuff from several years ago. But actually, we're getting better and better at creating immersive experiences that people can go inside and share. And sharing's a big, big thing. I think it was said, you know, in previous talk, sharing is central to all this. And these systems, cloud-based systems, can deliver information to anything, anywhere, anytime. They can take the response, we can get the response back in, it adds to the data, we can analyse it, and we can either respond, predict, or just tick it yes or no, all without the intervention of a teacher. The really interesting thing for me is, of course, the prediction stuff. Because actually, if we do this right, the machine can tell you what you should be doing next based on what you've done. And that starts to take away things like writing curriculum as a job for teachers. And it starts to sort of change things. And it really puts the student absolutely at the centre of the learning experience. You know, and all this stuff we're doing at the moment with multimodal and blended learning, if for me, that's the surface layer of this. And underneath it, we have this emerging machine that will change things radically to the point where this, in a way, is viewed just as the interface for the learning experience. And people who make games understand games are going to be key to this, because making this sort of thing engaging is absolutely vital. Because there's nothing more soul-destroying than a terrible user experience in technology, especially when you're trying to learn something. Now, you know, I'll go back. I mean, the question that comes out of this, I'm almost finished now, but the question, I'll make two sets of predictions. The big question for me is, and the big issue for me really is, if we have, in the next 50 years, a big push on data, if we start to do real proper analysis and predictive behaviour comes out of that, and we start to replace various teacher functions, if we get to the system where this machine can tell you what you will be learning next, the question I've got to ask is, what will it be telling my children they need to know? And are we going to get to a situation where we are totally divorced from this because we start to not have human interjection? What will the machine decide, with its knowledge of the economy, that your children and grandchildren need to know in the next 10 years? because we know that millions of jobs are going to disappear and change and evolve. We don't know what those jobs will be. There's a great article in the appendix where you can have a look at top 20 jobs that are ranked by probability of disappearing soon through automation, including, believe it or not, making gravestones. Apparently that's 96% certain of disappearing. Or they're going underground, I don't know. I'm here all week. But we have this very real system emerging, and all of these systems are interlocking, and the pools of data that we're getting about people are bigger and bigger and bigger. And over a period of 50 years, we are going to know what your parents learned, how they reacted, what jobs they did. We're going to have all that data. We're going to have your peers' data. We're going to have your uncle's data. All the data around your family, where you lived, what postcode. You're going to have massive, incredible data sets with incredible computational power that can accurately predict something. And we might, and I think this is the biggest fear I've got with it, we have no idea why that machine is asking that person to do that. And, this is where the teacher's role for me changes. So I'll finish with two sets of predictions. And this is what I said about taking the true tomorrow's world approach of thinking way ahead. I think what we'll see, certainly within 50 years, without a doubt, possibly quicker in this case, is a true and deep blend of online and whatever online becomes, connected real-world instruction. I think within 30 years we will start to see regularly schools and colleges having people deliver lessons, lectures and learning remotely. That's going to come. It's already being trialled and already being done. In fact, there was even a story about this in the Daily Mail yesterday. So it's getting into popular consciousness. But we'll still see teachers teaching. Because as we move to this new paradigm and this new industrial revolution where everything's based on data and analysis and knowledge and predictiveness, we will still need moderators. We will need people to sort of decide for us, to stop that fear that I have, that this thing will tell my kids to do something I don't think they should be doing. I think we have a load of technologies that are coming that are very exciting. You'll be able to do your art homework, submit it, get it marked and sent back and printed without it ever seeing a person. It's quite feasible to build something like that now where you'd submit an image and it ranks it according. I mean, I've had it on Flickr for years with the interestingness algorithm. Now take that 3 or 4 steps further with bigger pools of data and better understanding of people and tastes and culture, and you get something that's quite remarkable, I think, that will emerge. And you can do the same with music. I think you'll start to see much more artificially generated voices, avatars and things, talking to kids, talking to people. Again, we're starting to move to that. We're moving very quickly now to voice control of phones. Google are doing really, really well with Android on that. I think language barriers are disappearing, so there's no worries about locality. I think it was Skype that announced only the other week they've introduced a Star Trek-style live translator for you to talk via Skype with, and it translates on the go. Baby steps in technology terms, but in 50 years' time, what might happen? I mean, when you think that, when was the first powered flight? 1903? And then in 1969 we landed on the moon. That was a hell of a journey. And there is no reason why our similar journey over 50 years can't be as profound. And I think by this time what we'll have are these big full data sets that I've been talking about. We'll understand who people are, who they're related to, what they're doing, what their relations did, where they live, postcodes, all that sort of stuff. Insurance companies are doing this now. Right? They are giving you apps that sit on your phone, that track the way you drive, that all build up data about your driving habits, and we can start to analyze that. So we can start to predict that this person is very, very likely to have an accident soon. God knows what it'll do for the gambling industry. But I think that what will happen is, once we start to do this properly, we can truly build that student-centered learning path. And I think going one step further ahead, 100 years, way into the far future, and I love doing these things because every single thing on here is wrong, and I will not be around to collect on bets. But 100 years in the future, I genuinely think the function of schools will have changed. And I think for the first time in several hundred years, they will have to change, because I think a huge amount of the learning will be done via machine in some way. And I use the term machine very loosely, as some people talk about the government as the man. Yeah, I think we're going to start being the era of the machine. Schools, for me, at that point, will serve a very useful function to keep people socialised. Much more than they are doing at the moment. There's always been an element of that about schools. But actually there will be places where you can play sports, where you can engage with the people, learn to mix with other people. I don't think necessarily there will be places where you necessarily do much direct learning. And I think that, you know, for the teachers in the room is the bombshell, because I'm not sure you'll be needed. But luckily that's 100 years away, so you'll all be dead by then. And you'll have retired and taken your meagre pensions. But I genuinely think we're going to see, you know, this range of things. Now, timescales are rubbish, okay? We can't predict timescales. But I do know that generationally, technology is adopted more slowly than we want it to be. And having been in digital for over 20 years, I can see that only now are we getting to the place, technologically, where everybody in 1993, when they saw their first web browser, thought we would be within 5 years. Things take a generation to go through. They sometimes take 2 generations. You know, and we'll have this completely predictive learning path that lasts through your entire life, primarily delivered wherever you are as a student. Your actual likely behaviour will be understood and predictable. Schools becoming social places for human-to-human interaction. I also see a thing about merging of schools and universities, because you know, the university thing has arisen out of the old mechanical industrial revolution, where you need people to get to a certain level and then you get them on the machines and a few are plucked out to go and become ruling class. I'm sounding like a Marxist now. But that's, you know, pretty much what has happened. I don't see that distinction occurring within 100 years. Once you have true lifelong learning, what's the difference between a university and a school? It's just what you're being asked to do in there. I think kids will need much more counselling and mentoring. The college I worked with Mark Lewis on to open works on a model of having no teachers and only mentors. And it works spectacularly well and is incredibly successful. So you can do that now if you want. And schools, of course, could be anywhere. There's no reason why they should have their own buildings. Each business could have a schoolroom where the counselling and mentoring occurs. There's no reason for place anymore, unless it's somewhere you have to go to do the socialising stuff. I'm going to stop. I'll say thank you. There is on there, on SlideShare, another bunch of slides, and some appendices. For instance, the job disappearing probabilities with a link is quite interesting. But all of this is down to data and automation. You know, and it's really interesting when you start to see the jobs that have been predicted to disappear. Bike repairer. How the hell can you replace a bike repairer? Is that a Python sketch, wasn't it? Receptionists. Hopefully doctors' receptions will go first. Loan officers, thankfully, will disappear. The trouble is they'll be tracking you more closely and you've no chance of getting away from the automated system. And these guys are already automating. You know it, you get the calls. And we are entering this world where our kids and our grandkids are going to be ruled by systems that are smart, predictive, analytical, and sit on top of pots and pots of data that is continually being collected. And that will fundamentally change, I think, most people's roles, not only teachers. I think you guys here doing education games and stuff will have a crucial role in making experiences and the way we interact satisfying. And I think that's why you need to understand things like Alistair talked about, and I think you need to understand what's going off underneath, because actually you need to understand the direction you're going. Power plant operators, that's my last one, thank you. Anyway, there's lots more on there, you can feel free to have a look. And I put that on for anybody who's interested.
Thank you, Richard. That was very, very interesting indeed. We are running out of time a bit, but that was such an interesting talk. I will open it up for questions. I'm going to go to Leon first because he's doing our live stream.
Okay, this is, I tried to get Second Life into schools for 5 years, and we did it outside of schools. The big barrier was a cultural one. People would lock down and not let it in. In the end, several of my colleagues now work in Second Life because I think it was Pearson who bought an archipelago of islands, which they then sold. They had a full-time soap running on them, and they sold it directly into the Asian market for people who are working in centres, in IT centres, who've got their own kit, but who wanted more demotic English in their interactions. So for me, it's the affordances of the technology rather than the technology itself. And it's the cultural waves on which it's riding. I think there's a nuance there that maybe, it's not coming out. What worries me is that there's no agency in this model for either pupils or teachers in the future. And that's the worry that I have, in that it's big data and big corporations rather than, small sets of people who want to take agency with what they do and build community around that.
Well, I think we don't. Sorry.
That's just throw it out.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was just a provocation, really, as a piece. So, it's going to leave as many questions as it even attempted to sort of address. But the reality is, once our underlying processes change to these models, the pressure starts to emerge upwards. And we have to change our behaviour on top to adapt. And you're doing that as designers already. You're making things responsive now because there are so many more devices. You're making things live because there is so much more live data available. 15 years ago you weren't. You loaded a web page and it was pretty static until you hit the refresh button multiple, hoping it would update. And I think you're right. I think there are millions of questions coming out of this, but I just think we are at the stage where things are starting to move that way. And I don't know what will happen. I just couldn't say. I do know that if the business end of it moves this way, the business practices will change too. And I talk about education as a business. It is a business. It's a very serious business. Teaching people in a way is one of the most important businesses. And it should be treated as a business. But I genuinely think this is opening up possibilities as well. And I worry that we will automatically just stand back into that default mode of saying, oh, well, machine said I should do this. My big worry is, what is the machine going to tell my kids to do? And how are we going to deliver that properly? It might not. It might all collapse and we might end up with 33,000 extra teachers.
My question is slightly different to some of the content you put in there. I'm kind of interested in what they're going to be learning. In terms of, we've covered, the process that they'll go through, but in a couple of points that you mentioned, it sounds as though we're going to have increased complexity, we're going to have a lot of data that's available to us and in real time. So is there a move away from learning knowledge as opposed to you're going to be just teaching skills?
Well, where do you get your knowledge now? You Google, yeah? When we were kids, or not some of you, but when I was a kid, I literally had to carry Google in there. And that is why rote learning was important and why the education model we had was so important. Sorry, this is actually another deck I've got. I'll do that in the pub in a few weeks. But actually, I had to carry this with me, and we don't have to carry it anymore. I mean, you can see it in little things. How many people remember phone numbers anymore? I used to know about 25 phone numbers off pat. I don't. I struggled to remember my landline number when somebody asked me yesterday, because I only use it for broadband. And, I don't remember anybody's number. I just remember their name. And I type it in. So when I want to phone my wife, I type in wife. And it calls her. It's marvellous. And you can just tell it to call wife, and it does. And I think this is interesting about what you're actually going to teach. And I was asked for something else recently to draw up some projected curriculum moving ahead. And one of the things I put in there quite heavily was things like philosophy. Understanding what is happening. Because when you are in a situation where you are educating kids, the government, as it stands, and the last government, seem to want to push kids through, to a large extent, training, because they want to get them fit for the world of work. But the world of work is going to change more rapidly than ever. So if you give people a set of skills that they finish with at 16 and can last them for 40 years, you know, those jobs don't exist really. What does exist is unpicking things intellectually and being able to expose things and understand things and criticise. And so I would put things like philosophy and science and art actually at the heart of curriculum and start with that way, and then spread out in a fan through technical skills, which can be changed every 3 years. Now, what's very important in there is the model I said is, you know, if the economy is changing, there is no reason why in 50 years these systems cannot realise that and will not realise that and start teaching people different things. We do not know what the emergent behaviour will be when we build these massive systems. You know, we could well be building the educational equivalent of Skynet. You know, and it could kill us all educationally. Or we could build something that leads us down a rosy garden path through the moonlight to paradise.
Stealing the microphone from you now.
Hi, I got a question about trust. So I see a lot of like automatic things. Well, the thing is, when it's getting more machinery, more automatic, more distance, how do you imagine people getting just something?
Do you trust Amazon?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you know, I think a really, really fascinating point, trust, because I still don't trust machines and I've been immersed in them for decades. I trust Amazon. They tend to deliver on the whole. And the more I interact with them, the more occasions where they deliver stack up. And the ones where they don't deliver diminish to tiny fractions. And so over time my trust builds. And the thing about the systems I'm talking about is they're still in their infancy, they're babies. They're taking baby steps. You know, and as we start to interact more and more with them, we will learn to almost ignore them. And I think the technology will become invisible. So for instance, banks. When's the last time you walked into a HSBC? It's all machines. It's designed with a curved shape like that to stop you going through to where the people are. There are just banks of machines, and right at the entrance there where the people are, there's a big sign saying Premium Banking, Personal Customer Service. Right? And it is designed to modify your behaviour over time so that you accept machines. We now trust our cash points. The very first ATM I ever used had a roll of canvas. It was in Birmingham. And every time you pressed a button, it went like this until it found the right question. You know, but things have got better. I can now just put my card on a machine and it takes the money. I'm already trusting that service. And yet I don't know. I'm not entering a PIN to validate anything. We were told PINs were needed for trust. Over time, businesses are getting you used to things. It is in their interest to do so. Ultimately, if you think about it, a bank is a good example, because a bank is basically a massive IT machine with a license to print money. In a lot of cases, banking functions don't need people. We keep people on to make people feel happy and to trust. But actually the core functions now, even when you go to see someone in a bank, they don't talk to you and go through your file. They turn straight to the machine and they just enter the stuff for you.
But banking's not education.
It isn't. But I don't think education can get away from this. Now, I don't know what will happen with education in that sense. I do know that already the governor, I'm a governor at a primary school, we are happily all using Scoogle. The governors included have Scoogle accounts and we all trade information on Scoogle and we trust it. There's confidential stuff on there. Stuff that you wouldn't want to get out about your kids. But we trust it. And that's because there are steps in getting people to trust things. And often it's just familiarity and repetition. No, it doesn't. Sorry.
The thing with big data and trusting it is, you know, we had In Bloom in America, 100 million from the Gates Foundation. It was going to wrangle the data for every piece of educational data for kids in 7 states. Just closed down last week because of the blowback about privacy. And I think one of the other issues, you know, when you talk about algorithms, is actually how valuable is that intellectual property? Because it's not going to be open. People are going to have proprietary algorithms. And, you know, does the algorithm for Richard Taylor's education system, is it better than your one? And, you know, are we going to have a choice? Because people like Pearson and big companies don't open up intellectual property. You know, that's what the value is going to be based on. And a lot of the data is going to be siloed. And I think one of the other issues here is demographics. At the moment, education is largely childcare plus. And the reality is that most employment's in the SME sector. It's going to become more in the SME sector and more in the micro SMEs, you know, down to 1 and 2 person businesses. Exactly. I had to laugh when I saw it. Your thing said that tailors will go to business. I can tell you, I pay more money to my tailor than I pay to my bloody bookmaker.
That's not me. That's just the probability thing.
Yeah, but I just think it's very interesting because actually I think the people who are going to be losing their jobs. I mean, I've outsourced my accounts 2 years ago, and instead of paying $5,000 a year, I pay $250 a year. You know, I don't do quite the same thing for my legal services, but it's the professional middle class who are going to be bending over in the employment stakes.
Again, I'll say that's another deck I've got on the emergence of new artisans. So you come along all 3 next weeks. And just to finish, I'm joking. Just to finish, on that point, I think the trust thing's interesting, but, you know, companies have got things wrong constantly. Look at the Edsel. You know, it's the most famous corporate disaster in history, in a way. You know, all that money spent on designing that car and nobody bought it. And people like car manufacturers will spend $1 billion on designing a car and very few people buy it. Things fail. We are in the baby steps of a brand new paradigm here. Things are bound to fail. And this is why I went for the option of 50 and 100 years, because actually you need generations to go through to get people to trust things and for things to work properly. But it's coming, whether you like it or not. I've been there. I've been at the sharp end designing this stuff.
It's coming, whether you like it or not. Okay, thank you very much, Richard. We're going to have a short comfort break, and then we will be back for the third and final talk.
Yeah. That was all just a mind fuck, just thrown out.
No. I'm slightly having this information.